Hey everybody, hope you're doing well today. We're here today to cover the heart in lab, and I add a little bit more information to the heart lab than most instructors do. So I want you to make sure that you're taking some good notes right here, because I'm going to have at least one question dealing with each of these little subsections of info I'm about to go over, and with the basic flow, the different circuits, parts of the circuits, and I'm going to have a few questions with that. So make sure that you're getting prepared with these questions. So let's move on. Again, we are on page 26 of our lab manual of the 2018 version, and so that's where our word book starts. I'm not going to cover the heart wall. I've put that into lecture because that's more of a functional topic than it is an anatomical topic. So you could mark out epicardium, the myocardium, and the endocardium, the three layers of the heart wall. Now, if you want to, you can take notes on the back side of page 25 in your lab manual or something like that for these next sections. But just don't forget that these are going to be on the lab test, because sometimes people only focus on the labels and they don't focus on some of the other things that may show up. Here's some basic cardiovascular information, right? So we're starting the cardiovascular system. We're not going to cover blood, but we do have three components of the CVS: the heart, which is our pump; the blood, which is our transport fluid; and our blood vessels, which contains the blood. So we are going to have a lab dealing with the heart, and that's what we're watching right now. And then next, for our next test, we will include blood vessels on that next test. So make sure if you have a question on this lab test that says, what are the three parts of the cardiovascular system? Well, you can just list these three parts very simply, right? Not too difficult. When we look at blood vessels, and again, this is going to be a separate lab, but I want to have a little bit of information here so that we're not just flying blind through parts of the heart. Blood vessels. Arteries, don't forget, go away from the heart. Capillaries. Arteries become capillaries. They get smaller and smaller and smaller, and they become capillaries. And these capillaries are important for exchange. These are our exchange vessels. And then they start to get larger and larger and larger as they go back to the heart. And these are the veins that are delivering the blood back to the heart. Again, be ready for a question on the test. Which vessels go back to the heart? Which vessels go away from the heart? Which vessels are exchange vessels? Okay, something like that as one of those questions. Now, which ones of these are red and which ones of these are blue or purple? Okay, if I ask the class that, usually they say arteries are red and veins are blue or purple. But vessel coloration is not due to if it's an artery or vein. There's two different circuits, right? So there's the pulmonary circuit that leads us to the lungs, and there's the systemic circuit that leads us to the rest of the body's cells. So pulmonary circuit goes to the lungs, picks up O2, drops off CO2, comes back to the heart. And then the systemic circuit takes that blood that just got recharged at the lungs and sends it out to all the cells in your body so that it can they can live, they can get their oxygen and undergo cell respiration. Now, a lot of times we only focus on the systemic circuit and we don't think about the pulmonary circuit. And that's the reason that these colorations of these vessels are not proper when we say arteries are red, veins are blue. That's proper in the systemic circuit. But think about this. If you are an artery leaving the heart and heading to the lungs, why are you going to the lungs in the first place? You're going to the lungs because you need oxygen. So if you're an artery leaving the heart in the pulmonary system, you are not oxygenated, so you are not red. So in the pulmonary circuit, that traditional, what most people think red equals artery, blue or purple equals vein, in the pulmonary circuit, that is flipped backwards. The arteries are blue and the veins are red. After you leave the lungs and you're heading back to the heart, you are oxygenated. So the vessel coloration is all about, are you carrying oxygen or are you not? So again, on the test, I may ask you which vessels are red, and there's going to be some suckers that's going to fall in the trap and put arteries. Don't put that. Put oxygenated vessels, right? Vessels with oxygenated blood. Which vessels are blue? Vessels that are containing deoxygenated blood. Okay. And then I may ask you a question on the test. Which circuit goes to the lungs and back? Or which circuit goes to the body cells and back? So again, right here's 4 questions. Okay, easy stuff, but just a good intro to get us ready to talk about the heart. Now, a little bit more of an intro before we really get into all these parts. is dealing with flow. So here is the flow of the two circuits, and when we put them together, we get the entire flow through the cardiovascular system. Now we're going to start with the right atrium, and this is the beginning of or this is kind of the end of the systemic circuit. So we're going to drop off used blood from the superior and inferior vena cava into the right atrium. So the used blood, the blood that's already seen the cells, comes back to your right atrium first. Now it's going to flow into the right ventricle, but in order to get there, it must go through the tricuspid valve. Now on one side we got the tri, and on the other side we got the bi. So I always remembered that tricuspid has an R in it. So that means tri is on the right, right? And that even kind of rhymes a little bit, tri-right. Okay, so tricuspid on the right side. So you go through the tricuspid valve to enter the right ventricle. Now these valves are there to prevent backflow. When the ventricle contracts, squeeze that blood out of the heart, this valve shuts, so blood can't go backwards. It can only go forward into the pulmonary trunk. And once it enters the pulmonary trunk, when the ventricle relaxes, though, that blood wants to go back into the ventricle. So there's another valve, the pulmonary semilunar valve. This valve is there to prevent backflow from the pulmonary trunk back into that right ventricle. Okay, so now that we've got blood in the pulmonary trunk, a trunk is usually a bigger vessel that's going to split into smaller vessels. So the pulmonary trunk is a big vessel, and it splits into the pulmonary arteries. And the pulmonary arteries are eventually going to reach the lungs. Now underline this, and I put this in bold to let you know, here is where the exchange is taking place in this circuit. This is the real function of the circuit, to get the blood to the lungs, to grab the O2 and drop off the CO2. Okay, so here we're at the lungs, we're doing our job, we're at the capillaries, and we're doing work, right? Now we picked up that O2 and dropped off that CO2, and we need to head back to the heart, okay, because each of these circuits goes back to the heart. So we're going to head back to the heart through the pulmonary veins, and we're going to dump that blood into the beginning of the systemic circuit, which is the left atria, right? Now, this is kind of the beginning or the end of the circuit. And to be honest with you, I misspelled this. This should be atrium. I put atria. Atria is plural. Sorry about that. Atrium, U-M, is singular. Okay. I made that mistake here, so on the test, you can make that mistake as well. All right. So we're dumping this fresh oxygenated blood into the left atria. And then we're going to move it down into the left ventricle. Again, we go through a valve, the bicuspid valve, or some people know it as the mitral valve. Okay, the left ventricle is the biggest pumper in your heart. This is the one that sends it all the way out to the rest of the body. And so this is the valve that sometimes starts to blow out. It starts to blow backwards a little bit. And so some people know this from the term mitral valve prolapse. And this is when that valve is not shutting properly, and that's what causes a heart murmur. Many times that's the cause of a heart murmur. No matter what, a heart murmur is blood going backwards through a valve when it shouldn't. Okay, so now we've got the blood in the left ventricle. We pumped it out into the aorta. And again, just like in the pulmonary trunk, now that these ventricles are relaxing, the blood wants to go backwards into those ventricles. So we need another valve. Over here we have the aortic semilunar valve, and the aortic semilunar valve prevents the blood in the aorta from coming back into the ventricle. Now what I didn't tell you about these two is that they're stretchy. These two are elastic. So whenever we pump the blood into them, we kind of charge that elastic up, we stretch it. And so whenever the ventricle relaxes, that elastic wants to recoil back down, and so it wants to squeeze that blood back into the heart. But instead, with these valves shutting, it forces that blood to be squeezed forward, and there it goes to the body's cells in the systemic circuit. So now again, we've got boldface underlined. That means here's where the capillaries are, here's where the exchange is, this is where the work is taking place for that circuit. We're giving the cells their nutrients and their oxygen. We're taking away their CO2 and their waste. So we're exchanging. Here's the capillaries for the circuit. And then we're eventually going to get them into veins and then form the two largest veins, the superior and the inferior vena cava. Now, think about it logically, people. The inferior vena cava is bringing blood back from below the heart, and the superior vena cava is going to bring blood back from above the heart. Okay, so that's an easy way to kind of think about it. Now, again, this is now used blood. It's got CO2 and waste in it, so we need to take that back to the lungs. So we're going to then re-enter the pulmonary circuit. So these things do a figure 8 pattern. If you haven't figured it out yet, it's a figure 8 constantly going back on itself. All right. Now, I don't have any labels on this image like I do with some of my other ones. So you're just going to have to make sure that you're following the pointer. And as we go down through the list, we're going to do our best to make sure that we can list anything and everything that's on each of these pictures. Now, when I look at this, we notice that down here is more of that muscle looking structure. And up here it's not. Well, this is still muscular up here. Up towards the top, we have the atria, and down towards the bottom, we have these two ventricles. Now, here is the right ventricle, and we know this is the right ventricle if we follow our flow, because we're going to head into that blue pulmonary trunk. So there is one of the vessels you can label. There's the pulmonary trunk, and that's leaving out of that right ventricle here. And so the right ventricle, again, is what's going to feed that blood to the lungs. Again, this artery is going to be blue because it's deoxygenated. Now, this left side over here, this is the left ventricle, and this is the one, and you can't tell, but behind there is where the aorta pops out. So the aorta pops out behind the pulmonary trunk. And so the left ventricle is going to feed this aorta. So you can label this whole thing as the aorta if you would like. And while we're at it, let's just go ahead and do the parts of the aorta. So here is the ascending aorta, the part that's coming out of the heart. Then it bends and it makes the aortic arch, and then everything else starts to head downstream, downhill. So everything past that bend is called the descending aorta. Okay. Now on our list under aortic arch, we have brachiocephalic trunk, left common carotid artery, and left subclavian artery. These are the three branches we see coming up off of the aortic arch. So here's the first one, the brachiocephalic trunk, brachio arm, cephalic head. This supplies the right arm and right head with blood, right side of the head. Here is the left common carotid artery. This is going to supply the left side of the head with blood. And this is the left subclavian artery. This is going to supply the left arm with blood. What we're going to see this brachiocephalic do later in our blood vessel lab is it's going to split into a right common carotid and a right subclavian. So we're going to mirror this, but right here it's just got a common trunk, the brachiocephalic trunk or brachiocephalic artery. Now, as I mentioned, here's the right ventricle and left ventricle. Well, right here, we see these blood vessels coming into the left atrium. And these are veins that are entering that heart, right? Because veins come to the heart, and these are red veins. So that tells us these are actually our pulmonary veins. Okay, so there's the pulmonary veins, and these pulmonary veins are leading into this left atrium. If we look back over here, we can barely see a little bit of the right atrium, and we can also see a little bit of this blue vessel out right here. There's the superior vena cava. Now, the other thing that we can notice here that I didn't point out, here's the pulmonary trunk. Now, what you can't see is right here, the pulmonary trunk is going to split. And so you don't really get a good view. Here is one split going to the left side, but the other split goes underneath. You can barely see it right there, going underneath the aortic arch. This split is the only one we can label from this picture. This split is the left pulmonary artery. Okay, so here's the left pulmonary artery, and here are the left pulmonary veins. So they're right beside each other. Okay, artery is blue and the veins are red because we're in the pulmonary circuit. Now, I know that this is a little bit out of order, but I want to switch over while we're on this picture, and I want to point out, well, before we get there, actually, my bad. Let's point out a couple of other things. Here is the apex. Okay, sorry about that, folks, being a little disorganized here. Here's the apex. This is the tip of the heart, and this is really weird, but up here towards the top, we're at the very bottom of the aorta, the pulmonary trunk, and the superior vena cava. This region up here at the top of the heart where the blood vessels plug in is referred to as the base. Okay, and I'll show you an image of the base again in the next picture. Now, when we look at these atria, okay, I didn't mention, here's again, the left atria and the right atria. We see these little corners, right? Here is a corner. These things kind of look like ears. These ears use the term that we use for our ear, auricle. So here, this corner of the right atrium is the right auricle. And this corner right here of the left atrium is the left auricle. These auricles are expandable pockets. It allows the atria to take in extra blood that might be pumped back to the heart without rupturing the heart, exploding the heart. So that's definitely a good thing, okay? Now, we also have some grooves. Let's talk about these grooves. I need to go down this list a little bit better and make sure that I show you all these things before I start jumping around, so I apologize. So under auricles on our list, we have coronary, and in parentheses, it's atrioventricular sulcus. I don't want you to ever call it the coronary sulcus. I want you to only call it atrioventricular sulcus. So mark out the word coronary there. Atrioventricular means between the atria and the ventricles. So we notice that there is this groove, and in the groove there's blood vessels, okay? But this groove that goes all the way around the heart between the atria and the ventricles is the atrioventricular sulcus, okay? Now, this groove right here with these blood vessels in it, that is between the ventricles, this groove is the between the ventricles sulcus. This is the anterior interventricular sulcus. This is on the front of the heart. So anterior interventricular sulcus is the groove. Now, as I mentioned, there are several blood vessels that are in these grooves. So we're going to talk about those in just 1 second. We'll talk about these coronary arteries and these coronary veins real quick and make sure that we label them. Okay, so we've already pointed out, I'm just going to run down the list. We've already pointed out superior vena cava. We can't point out inferior vena cava. We haven't been able to point out the right pulmonary arteries or pulmonary veins. We'll see those from the posterior view. We've already covered the aorta. So last thing on this page is this white connector right here. And this almost looks like we're seeing through, but this is actually a ligament that's connecting the aortic arch to the pulmonary trunk. This is called the ligamentum arteriosum. So this is number 20 at the bottom of page 26. Ligamentum arteriosum is a ligament that helps to hold these together. This actually used to be an opening when you were inside of your mama. We used to have an opening between these two because we weren't breathing air. So we didn't have any need for a pulmonary circuit at all. So any blood that enters the pulmonary circuit just needs to be redirected back to the other circuit. And so this used to be a tunnel to connect. If there any blood entered this, it just went back into the other circuit, since you're actually just kind of getting that oxygen from your mama. Okay. Now, if we switch over to page 37, we see coronary circulation. Coronary circulation, I want to start covering a little bit right here because we've got some of these vessels. Right here, we see this artery branching out, and we see another artery branching out right here. This artery branches out on the right side, and this one branches out on the left side. So this is the right coronary artery, and this that comes out and actually runs down the middle is called the left coronary artery. Now, the very beginning for a lot of people is called the left coronary artery, and once it enters this groove, many people rename it, and you may see that term there, the anterior interventricular artery. I don't care if you use that term. In fact, you can mark it out if you'd like, just like on the right coronary artery on our list. You can mark out posterior interventricular artery if you'd like. If you want to use the terms, that's fine with me. But the left coronary artery comes out and it rides all the way down the middle here. And some people do refer to this as the anterior interventricular artery. The right one runs around to the back side, and then it's going to go down the middle of the back, and there it's called the posterior interventricular artery. I'll point that out when we get the other view. Now, you can barely see this blood vessel branching out on the side underneath that auricle of the atria. And this is called the circumflex artery, or the circumflex branch. So this is the circumflex artery. It circumflexes around through that through that atrioventricular sulcus, and then it kind of branches out over here on the left side of the heart. Okay, now here we also see the beginning of the veins. These are the cardiac veins. So here we see these two veins in the front, in that anterior interventricular sulcus. These are the anterior cardiac veins, and when they merge, they're stopped being called the anterior cardiac veins. At that point now, they're referred to as the great cardiac vein. And kind of like how that right one wraps around to the backside, this great cardiac vein is going to wrap around to the backside of the heart. Okay, so we'll cover some more of those vessels when we get through that other image. So let's move on. That's about everything that we can cover from this image. Let's move on. Let's look at some of these things. Here we can see that superior vena cava really well. We can see that right atrium, and here is that right auricle. Here we can see the left atrium, and here is that left auricle. Okay. Here are the left pulmonary veins, and right here is one of the right pulmonary veins. Now, here's something new that we haven't covered yet. This is the aortic semilunar valve. For me, I have that under number 34 on page 27. The aortic semilunar valve, and here is the pulmonary semilunar valve, and that's number 33 there on page 27. So here's the valves that help make sure that blood doesn't come back into the ventricles when those ventricles relax, as I talked about under that flow. Now, this is a great image to show us. Here's the beginning of the right coronary artery, and here it branches there. And here's the beginning of the left. Now, a lot of people consider this to be the left coronary artery, and when that circumflex branches off, it becomes the circumflex artery and the anterior interventricular artery. Now, again, if you just want to call this whole thing the left coronary artery, I'm fine with that, as long as you know that that is a different artery. That is the circumflex artery. Okay. Again, we can see right ventricle and left ventricle, and besides that, there's not too much else we can see here that we haven't seen yet. Here is that posterior inferior view that I was mentioning. The right coronary artery is coming around from this side right here. And so here we can see, let's stick with those vessels and let's kind of finish these vessels up over on page 27. Here we can see the right coronary artery coming around, and here it rides down the middle in the back or the bottom, and this groove is that posterior interventricular sulcus. And so the vessel that runs through there, the red vessel that runs through that groove, is called the posterior interventricular artery, and that is number 35B. Now, like I said, if you'd like to use that term, you can. If you just continue to call this the right coronary artery, I would be fine with that on this test. Okay. Now, these veins, here we can see the great cardiac vein wrapping around from the other side. As I mentioned from the front, that great cardiac vein was wrapping around on that left side. And here we can see that it's going to merge with these two other vessels and this one. We're not going to cover this one, but we're going to cover these two. This one that's running down the middle in the bottom or back of the heart is the middle cardiac vein. And wrapping around kind of along with that right coronary artery, this little vein coming around from the right side is the small cardiac vein. The small cardiac vein and the middle cardiac vein are going to merge. And when they merge, they eventually merge with the great cardiac vein. Now, this may be tough to see, but only after both of these merge. Just the short section right here after that merger. It's not very thick. It's not very long. It's very skinny. Okay, just that short section before it plugs into this right atrium is called the coronary sinus. Now we're going to open this up in just a second, and we're going to see that coronary sinus, the opening of it into the right atrium. Okay. In this view right here is the inferior vena cava, so you definitely should be able to pick that out, the inferior VC. This is a bottom view of our descending aorta, and this is our right pulmonary veins. Okay, there's one of the right pulmonary veins. Now, let's keep going. Let's take another view. So again, that was the bottom. This is more of the back side, more of the posterior side. Again, here's that superior vena cava. There's that inferior vena cava, both coming into the right atria. Here we see the the ascending aorta, the aortic arch with the brachiocephalic artery, the left common carotid, and the left subclavian artery. And here, all of these little vessels branching off are branching off of the descending aorta. And here we can actually finally see the backside of the left pulmonary artery. And right here is the only view we have of the right pulmonary artery. Remember that pulmonary trunk came up, and it looks like a big letter Y when it comes up, so it branches. Left pulmonary goes to the left lung, right pulmonary artery goes to the right lung. And so it kind of just looks like a big Y as it branches. Again, here is our left atrium, and whenever we look, here are those left pulmonary veins coming in. Again, there's the right pulmonary veins. Here's our left pulmonary veins. Again, that is below the left pulmonary artery and below the right pulmonary artery. So these guys, remember, same sides. This is the artery, this is the vein, this is the artery, this is the vein. Okay? Now, let's take another view. This is the right side of the heart. Okay, again, we can tell because here's the superior vena cava coming into the right atrium. Here is again that right auricle, and we can barely see that pulmonary semilunar valve right there. And what we do see here, and the only thing I really want to use this image for, is maybe to show this is the right coronary artery wrapping around the heart and branching off right here. Okay, if you've got the heart model itself, then you'll notice that this is where the heart opens. They've kind of photoshopped it so you can't see that, but right here is even a little bit where they couldn't Photoshop. So here, this is called the marginal artery or the marginal branch. Okay, so the marginal artery, there's really only one. It says the right marginal artery, but this is just the marginal artery. If you can put right, you don't have to put right for this test either way. But this is the branch off of the right coronary artery that we need to learn, this marginal artery. Okay, over there on the left side, if you remember, here was coming down, and we can't see it, there would be the left coronary artery, and right here branching out on the left side, on the other side of that auricle, is going to be that circumflex branch. So here's that circumflex branch coming out and riding all the way down on the left side. Again, here's that left atrium, and there we can see those pulmonary veins. Here we do see the anterior cardiac veins creating the great cardiac vein, and this is the one that wraps around, eventually merges with the middle and the small cardiac vein, and then plugs in with that coronary sinus as it forms it. Now here's the internal anatomy. Okay, so this is really all that we need to take care of is the internal anatomy from here on out to finish this up. But also I'm going to add the conducting system. So I want you to add some things on the bottom of page 27. We're going to add 6 terms because I'll be familiar with all those conducting parts that we're going to talk about in the lecture. Now, going down our list on page 27 with the internal anatomy, starting with number 21, here again is our right atrium, and here's our left atrium. Okay, remember anatomic position, how it fits into our body. Here is right, here is left. Anytime you're in doubt, make sure that you see that superior cava goes to the right, right? So here is the right. Down here is our right ventricle, and over here is our left ventricle. Now, these white flaps are our valves that we need to go through to get between the atrium and the ventricles. Again, try on the right. So tricuspid valve and bicuspid valve. Now, on the back side of each of these valves, we see these threads. I like to call them the cords. These are called the chordae tendineae. This is number 31 on our list. Chordae tendineae are going to attach to number 32, and that's these mounded muscles. You see those mounds? These are called papillary muscles because they're mounding up. Also right here, we can see a nice big mound, right? So this is a papillary muscle. Anything that the chordae tendineae attach to are papillary muscles. But I want you to notice that not everywhere in here is attaching to a cord, okay? There's the rest of the muscle over here. You see these ripples? You kind of see these ripples right in here. There's more ripples right here and kind of ripples on the side. All the rest of the muscle in the ventricle is called trabeculae carneae. It's number 28 on our list, trabeculae carneae. Okay. Similar to this trabeculae carneae, if we look up here in this right atria, we can see some muscles. These muscles, they're not as defined as muscular. These are number 27. These are the pectinate muscles. So these pectinate muscles can help that atria do some contracting in order to move that blood on down through the system. Now, we have basically covered almost everything here except for about 4 things. Right here we see this wall. Let's cover the septum. This wall is between the 2 atria. So we're going to use the word for between, inter, and use the word atria. So interatrial septum. Don't forget that a septum is always a wall that separates. So here's the interatrial septum. Here is the interventricular septum. Between the 2 ventricles is this wall. Okay, so kind of creating a grid down the middle are the septum, interatrial, and then interventricular. And then we use the tricuspid and bicuspid valve, and that's how we kind of grid it up into 4, the 2 atria and the 2 ventricles. Now, if we look closer inside this right atria, then we're going to see, first off, this depression. This depression was the other opening in your heart when you were inside of your mama. Again, you didn't need this pulmonary circuit. You really only needed that systemic circuit because you're robbing oxygen from mama. And so this was an called the foramen ovalis. But after you took your first breath, this and that ligamentum arteriosum snap shut, and it creates the pulmonary circuit, and it opens those vessels for the very first time when you take that very first breath. So this heals up and is now called the fossa ovalis. Now, if this doesn't heal properly and it allows blood to circulate between the 2 ventricles when the baby is out of mama, that's a bad thing. And so now deoxy blood is mixing with oxy blood, and that's not good. Okay. This, if that takes place, this is where the hole in the heart is. So if you've ever heard about a baby being born with a hole in their heart, it's not that they have a hole on the outside of their heart. That means blood's just squirting everywhere inside of their chest. That makes no sense. That baby would die, right? Instantly. Here, it's a hole in the inside of the heart. And the problem is it's allowing the bloods to mix, and now the baby getting enough oxygen in their bloodstream. Okay, so fossa ovalis is this oval depression. This little dark hole is our last term that we're going to cover. Okay, of things that are in our book, and then we're going to add those 6 for the conducting system. Okay, here is the opening of that coronary sinus. Now remember, the great cardiac vein merged with the middle and small cardiac vein, and it formed the coronary sinus before it entered into the right atrium. This is the actual opening at the end of that coronary sinus where the blood from the heart comes back. And that makes sense. We got used blood from above, used blood from below. Why don't we take the used blood from the heart and just put it right into that exact same chamber? Okay. Again, here we can see tricuspid and some chordae tendineae, and there's that trabeculae carneae. Interatrial septum, interventricular septum, and there is the bicuspid valve right there. Okay, so if you want to label those, you're more than welcome to from that image. Here's the one that you can't forget. And so again, kind of like that first information that we covered, this might be a good idea for you just to write it down at the bottom of page 27. In my opinion, you should write a new category that says the conducting system and put a line underneath it, kind of like how internal anatomy and coronary circulation are on that page 27 as big groups. So conducting system, list these 6 terms underneath it from top to bottom. Sinoatrial node, make sure that you spell that. Okay, internodal pathways, atrioventricular node, make sure that you spell that one. Okay, AV bundle, I would be fine if you abbreviated that one, but that's the only one of these 6 that you can abbreviate is the AV bundle. Okay, so go ahead and jot those down. You can even start and list sinoatrial node is 42, internodal pathways is 43. Atrioventricular node as 44, AV bundle is 45, bundle branch is 46, Purkinje fibers 47. So if you want to do it that way, that might be an easy way to make sure that you don't forget about these. Now let me explain. This is the conducting system. There's certain cardiac muscle cells in the heart that don't contract. Instead, they simply pass action potentials. That's what we're looking at. So basically what it does is these muscle cells truly just act like neurons. So they're just passing these signals. So the signal is created at the SA node or the sinoatrial node. This area, these cells, they can't contain their ions properly. And because of that, they don't have a stable, resting membrane potential. I know, that's nervous stuff. That's old school. You don't want to think about that. But remember, we're going to talk about this in lecture if we haven't already. And so usually muscles have a stable, or nerves have a stable resting membrane potential, so they don't just stimulate themselves. This doesn't. It's not stable. It drifts to threshold. And remember, anytime we hit threshold, we make an action potential. So this is the guy who makes the action potential first, the SA node. And that's the reason that we tend to call him the pacemaker. Now, he's going to pass that AP through these internodal pathways. That's going to trigger the atria to contract. And there, the destination is to the AV node. The AV node is going to, the AP is going to arrive there, and there's going to be a pause. There's going to be a delay. It's just a split second, but that's enough time to allow the atria to contract and to start relaxing before the ventricles contract. And so this helps to set up the timing. That delay allows the atria to pump first before the ventricles pump, instead of both of them pumping at the exact same time, which means they would fight against each other. And that's not what we want to do. We want to pump it from one into the other. So atria, then ventricle. And that's what that delay sets up. Now, we need to send that AP down into the ventricles to stimulate them. So we start through the AV bundle. And here we're going to send that bundle through that interventricular septum. But because we got two sides, we need to split it. So the AV bundle needs to split so each side can stimulate that muscle. So we have two bundle branches. The bundle branches go all the way to the apex, all the way to the tip of the heart. From there, the fibers that fan backwards across the surface of the heart, these are called Purkinje fibers. These Purkinje fibers, when the AP is here, this is what causes the ventricles to contract. Again, when AP is at internodal pathways, atria to contract. When AP at Purkinje's, then ventricles contract. We start contracting from the apex, and we contract up towards the base because our big vessels are right here. So we don't need to squeeze down, we need to squeeze up. And so that's the reason we start at the apex and we fan back towards the base. Now, at that point, we have completed our lab for the heart. This is our last lab information before our lab test. So please make sure that you're spending adequate time preparing for this lab test. This is going to be a relatively easy lab test compared to the next one. The next one is going to be a little bit tougher with all the blood vessels. So knowing that that next one's going to be tougher, and a lot of times these things just get tougher and tougher throughout the semester, which this is not going to be that bad eventually. But I want you to prepare. I want you to knock this one out of the park. I want you to make 1,000 on this test, not 100, 1,000, right? You're just going to whoop its butt. So no, I really want everybody to do really well on this test. This is an easier one, so let's bank this grade. Let's make sure that we get a great grade, and that starts our average out excellent for the semester, right? And that helps us later on in the semester if we start to struggle, or maybe we just don't have time enough to take care of schoolwork. So do your best. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. Otherwise, I hope you have an awesome day.